Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Fireside Chat. Here with me is Chief Procurement Officer legend, TE board member, mentor, and most importantly, friend, Len DeCandia. Len, welcome to the stage.
Hey, Paul. Great to be here, and thanks for the kind words.
Can you give us a little bit of background about your career, Len?
Sure. I've been in this around 40 plus years. I started out as an engineer, but really most of my career has been around the evolution of supply chain management. I had my first assignment as a chief supply officer a long time ago, almost 30 years ago, with Roche, and it included procurement responsibilities and led 4 transformations at Roche and AmerisourceBergen, Estee Lauder, and most recently at the company where I started my career, Johnson & Johnson, as the global chief procurement officer, where I retired at the end of 2022.
Wonderful. Thank you. Just for those of you that don't know me, I'm going to give a little bit of background. My name is Paul Shagawat. I'm the co-founder and managing partner here at Transparent Energy. Company is about 15 years old. We help the largest energy users in the country mitigate risk and reduce budgets when it comes to both traditional and renewable energy sourcing. We've built a proprietary software platform, and that aligns us with the digital transformation of procurement, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today. We've run thousands of these auctions, and that represents billions of dollars in electricity, natural gas, and renewable energy spend. The reason I asked Len to join us today, there's several reasons, but I think the topic of what's going on right now within the energy world and why this conversation matters, it really can't be segmented into just one or two topics. There are several that I think are really important. And, Len and I have been having some conversations, and one of them is in regards to the current state of the grid, and are we in a position where we're actually ready to serve the needs of this growing demand while we're retiring some different plants throughout the country. And one big topic in the news most recently is Microsoft's private energy sourcing from 3 Mile Island. Len, you and I, in our last conversation, we were kind of talking about how there's some real concerns by the Fortune 500 and other large users about the current state of the grid. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do, Paul. I think, if I look at my career and the importance of the supply chain and procurement, it's really around supply and making sure you have what's needed available, or else you're not in business. And, having been through things like the .com bust, 9/11, the economy kind of crumbling in 2009, and most recently the pandemic, I think to be effective in a role like procurement or supply chain, you really need to shape your strategy around what's happening in the macro environment. And if you look at our macro environment right now, there's a couple of things. Forget about the election. Look at the United States as a whole. We're running some pretty extreme debt, and inflation is kind of sticky. It's really not going away. It's here to stay. Maybe we'll never get back to 2%. Maybe we're going to have to live in a world of 2.5% and 3%. And then when you look at the fact that we have high debt, inflation is still there, and there's a need for us to invest in infrastructure around technology that's evolving faster than we can keep up with. So if you think about things like crypto and the importance of data and the need of heavy data and the sustainability evolution with electric vehicles and so on, we're taxing our infrastructure. We've looked at energy, I think, in the past as a commodity, and chief procurement officers like me kind of relied on people in a distributed fashion to be able to do that, because it was there, it was available, and at a local level we thought people had it covered. But now with all these additional risks and the need for investment, it really has become much more important and critical to an organization's continued success, not only in cost, but also in availability. Cuba, the whole grid just shut down the past couple of days. Who could predict something like that, right? So how far are we away from that? We're now looking at, different technologies that were available 40 years ago and reconstituting these technologies. Is that the right answer? I don't know. But that's why people like you should be helping these organizations look at it in a more strategic way.
Yeah, Len, you brought up a lot of hot topics there. Obviously, you talked a little bit about crypto mining. You talked about, AI data centers. And then, we see some manufacturing coming back to the U.S. Think, microchip facilities, which are expected by a lot of economists to triple by 2032. right? So these are just some of the threats that we see right now. Forget about some of the weather patterns we just saw in Florida that, our prayers go out to all those folks in Florida that had to deal with those severe weather storms, both tornadoes, hurricanes, you name it. They're all very unpredictable. And the reality is, even a large company like Microsoft, their budget was off by about 800% last year. Their thought process was that they really didn't realize how many people would be using ChatGPT. So even these very large organizations that are finding ways to source their energy from alternative kind of unique sources, they're still struggling in today's current marketplace. You had mentioned before, Len, your time at Johnson & Johnson during the pandemic, having to kind of come out with a vaccine. Can you speak a little bit about what those hurdles looked like at that point in time? And the reason why I want to talk to you about that is I do actually think in a strange way it relates to sourcing energy in difficult times as well.
Yeah, I don't think we would have been ready to survive and thrive actually through the pandemic if we hadn't done the work leading up to the pandemic, not knowing that the pandemic was going to happen, obviously, like everyone else. And I started my assignment there in early 2016. And I think what we focused on was the fact that it was a company that was decentralized in supplier relationship management and sourcing for 100 years. And there was a recognition that in order to support a $100 billion a year revenue base, we needed to do that differently. We really needed to have more governance, more oversight, and more understanding of our sources of supply, because through my career, suppliers have become that much more important, become global, and there's been much more outsourcing, regardless of what business that you were in. So we invested in two areas, right? We invested in technology, in allowing technology through better integrating the buying process to allow us to basically see who we were doing business with and how we were doing business with them. And we tried to simplify all of our processes. So we went from over 90,000 suppliers when I first took over to roughly 40,000, a little over 40,000. Why would you do that? Well, you had to simplify the relationships. You have to leverage the relationships. And I think strategically, you just can't go out and beat suppliers up for the lowest cost. You really need to align your supplier base around your own growth. So if you're dealing with fewer suppliers that are more strategic, they want to grow as you grow. And I think that allows you to make more mutually beneficial decisions. So think about the fact that, we were sitting in a position of being the world's largest healthcare company at the greatest healthcare crisis of our lifetime, needing to, supply markets in over 70 countries around the world, suppliers in more than 70 countries around the world, where every day countries were either opening or closing, and we needed to keep sites open and safe for our suppliers and our suppliers' personnel so that we can continue to supply life-saving drugs. We never made a vaccine before, but we had committed to the world to make a vaccine in 12 months and had a fantastic team and worked across all the functions. We were able to identify, validate, and scale over 200 suppliers within a 12-month period and make over 600 million vaccines in the first year with the capabilities of making more. Well, that just doesn't happen because you go home on Friday night and come in Monday morning and you say you're going to take on a challenge like that around the world. You have to be prepared to deal with the macroeconomic conditions that you're faced with. And I think right now, many procurement finance leaders are dealing with some serious issues. They're dealing with inflation that's sticky. They're dealing with technology that's evolving faster than they know how to deploy it in order to achieve productivity levels that are going to allow them to continue to compete. And they're dealing with significant risk every day. And so where do those risks come from? And where do you put strategies and relationships in place that can help you manage that risk? And I think that's why I'm excited around what transparent energy is all about, because it isn't about, taking the risk of introducing new technology. Yes, technology is part of it, but it is really about establishing competence, knowledge, and expertise from an end-to-end category management perspective, putting it in place in a matter of months and allowing organizations to have the ability and a line of sight to manage their energy and their longer term sustainability needs, and they've never had before. And it's not just for themselves. My previous role, I had to commit to sustainability targets for my suppliers. Now I can be a resource for my suppliers to achieve some of those sustainability objectives.
You hit upon so many things there, Len, and I'm really happy you were able to do that. And congratulations again about accomplishing that feat when it came to getting that vaccine out as quickly as you guys did. I would say that you made a really good point of that. It wasn't about short hours. It was a long process, but it also had a lot to do with where you guys were at that point in time, what you had built up, the relationships you had been able to utilize. So, Len, you had mentioned a lot of different topics there, and I want to unpack some of them. Let's start with centralization. That's something I know that you were doing a lot of at Johnson & Johnson, but something that we're seeing on a daily basis, and it's not often talked about, is how fragmented energy buying is today. We see that a lot of organizations, Fortune 500, just large C&I customers, they're operating in silos at the site level. And because of that, they don't have a lot of organized data. Can you explain a little bit about, scenarios that you found within large organizations where they do operate in silos and what some of those difficulties are that arise from that?
Yeah, I think, it's really important, right? So there's a couple of things here, Paul, that are important with all of this. One, you don't do this because you want to take away the responsibilities, the accountabilities of the budget owner and the people at the local level, right? What you want to do is you want to give them tools and insights to better enable them to be more effective in their roles. So in essence, a function like procurement or supply chain or finance they're enabling functions to allow budget owners to be effective. And companies have so much information, but if that information isn't integrated, it really doesn't help the individual budget owner. So I can talk about example after example where throughout our organization, we had people working with the same supplier on similar projects at completely different terms and conditions, or doing the same project over and over again and buying the same data over and over again. And you lose time and you lose insights with all of that. So if we live in a world where integrating data provides insights to allow you to make better and smarter decisions, what we're talking about here is really building up the knowledge base at that local level. So that local individual not only knows what's happening in their own market, but have the ability to benchmark, to learn from others, to leverage all that knowledge and insight to make better and smarter decisions around how they're sourcing and where they're sourcing from. And that's the one thing we really have to throw out as a caution flag here. We're not talking about centralization with heavy governance and moving decision-making somewhere else in the organization far from what's happening at the local level. We want to keep decision-making there. But what we want to do is we want to just really load up that individual with enough knowledge and insights and power of leverage so that they're optimizing their sourcing decisions through the knowledge and insights that are being provided by the central source. And that's the relationship an organization would have with an organization like yours, where you have that end-to-end, what we in the procurement world called category management, right? Understanding markets, understanding your position in the market, understanding the dynamics of what's happening in the market, understanding your forecasted needs, and integrating that so you're making better and smarter decisions today for tomorrow.
Len, you brought up a lot of great points there when you came to talking about centralization, and one piece of that is empowerment. When organizations bring transparent energy in, they don't want to disempower the folks at the site level that are doing the sourcing. What they like to say to them is, listen, we've vetted all the different companies out there, and we believe that there is an opportunity with transparent energy between their people who are market experts in different LDCs at the state level, at the ISO level, their process, which they've run over 11,000 of these auctions, and then their technology. A lot of that allows the actual buyer at the site level to be able to source their energy by getting a ton of data in a very short period of time. Only 2 weeks ago, we ran an auction for a very large customer, and we were able to get 250 unique bids from a large supplier pool in under 30 minutes. And what we actually were able to find by running an event like that is we were able to get the customer over $10 million in budget reduction. So the person at the site level felt like they had done a fantastic job. They were just utilizing some of the tools and the technologies and the processes that we were able to lay out in front of them. So the idea was to empower them by getting them more data and information, and then exploring and explaining that data information to them to be able to make their lives more efficient, and so that they can work on additional projects at the site level, whether that be for energy efficiency or something you had mentioned before, which was sustainability. So you had talked a little bit before about how you were tasked with some sustainability initiatives, in your prior career space. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I do want to talk about some of the problems that arise when we don't centralize the sourcing of energy.
You're right, Paul. And you've educated me tremendously since we've worked together. That's why it makes me so excited about working with you. A couple of things people don't recognize with energy is there's a difference between source and transportation, and they don't recognize that you can leverage so much at a source level and then have all that flexibility at the transportation level around where you bring that energy. I think that's something that educating a lot of people who have responsibilities of managing those budgets is critically important. Sustainability is something that I have a lot of passion for. One of the things Johnson & Johnson has a real commitment to is what's called their Health for Humanity report. And in that report, there's always carbon targets associated with where the organization is going. And a lot of those targets were, I would say, a little naively predicted 5 or 10 years ago, saying we're going to hit this number by 2045, and I don't want to even tell you how old I'm going to be at 2045. So I had a real difficult time making all these commitments. Matter of fact, I really was challenged by that. And the greatest influence organizations have, because they've made a lot of internal investments towards sustainable green energy. But now the next category or the next chapter of it is how do they influence some of their strategic suppliers around achieving those objectives. And here's where consortia type activities really work. Because if you can take your strategic suppliers and come together with kind of an integrated and a consolidated strategy, which benefits them because they have other clients who are asking them to work on sustainable energy, but leveraging their relationship with you to be able to achieve that. Now you've taken care of a couple of things. One, you're achieving your sustainability goals around your carbon footprint through your supplier base. And two, you're probably taking a lot of risk out for your suppliers because having your suppliers up and running is critical to your success because you're more dependent upon them to be able to run to achieve your objectives. We talked about the pandemic. Well, to make any product, there's 25, 30, 40 items, sometimes, sub-manufactured at other places. Well, if any one item is missing, you can't make your product. You can't make your product. You can't save someone's life, or you can't put a product on the shelf. And so this whole concept of sustainability is not an individual journey. It's a team journey. And that team consists of not only the company, but their supplier base. And a relationship with Transparent Energy really expands their ability to influence and to make a difference in the short term.
Yeah, for us, automating the process through the technology allowed us to be able to add about 150 different suppliers and developers of projects. So that created a really large pool for our customer base. So they're able to get a lot of information about the state of the natural gas and power markets directly from the suppliers when running these events. But also it helped allow them to have more visibility into the renewable markets and what that really meant for their budget. We had one particular customer recently. We did a large VBBA for them in which it created about 200 jobs and helped the customer become carbon neutral over the next 10 years. What was unique to them and what they didn't understand originally because they weren't able to track their scope 1, scope 2, definitely not their scope 3 emissions was because they hadn't had their information centralized, they were really struggling. We helped them to do that. We helped them to actually understand what their total carbon commitments needed to be. But more importantly, we used that large supplier pool that you mentioned before to give them visibility to all the different projects throughout the country. And we were able to actually find one opportunity for them with a large solar farm where it would actually be budget neutral. It wouldn't cost them really any additional monies to be able to actually source their power 100% from this green solar field. And I think that's something that when they were in silos, it was a real struggle for them. One term that you mentioned earlier was category management. Now, I'm familiar with this terminology, but some of the folks joining us today are not chief procurement officers. Can you speak a little bit to end-to-end category management?
Sure. There's a whole cycle to it, right? So it comes from, understanding what your needs are going to be, right? So internally, you understand I have a need to buy a certain service or a certain good for, my forecasted period. Let's say most companies work off of a rolling 12 months. So they look 12 months out, and then every month they kind of update what their needs are. And strategically, they look 3 and 5 years out as well, right? And so you basically say, okay, here are my understanding of my energy needs. And that's really the first most important challenge. Many companies have no real understanding what their needs are, right? So I think an organization like yours basically kind of educates them around the fact, well, here's how much you're using, and then looking at investments you're going to be making in sites or in product growth or whatever else. Here's what you're going to need over the next 2 to 5 years. So that's a critical first step, is really understanding what your needs are 1, 3, and 5 years out. Then understanding your needs, really understanding the market that you're going to be buying from, right? And so, you'll hear concepts like request for information. So now you're going to go out there, you're going to get as much information as you possibly can around the market, who the players are, how they, where they fit in the market, their performance level, and where they're making investments around capacity and their particular growth, and where they're making investments around effectiveness and efficiency in value, efficiency in sustainability, and efficiencies in introducing technology. And then based upon that whole RFI process, you're going to evaluate them against your needs and against your internal stakeholder needs. And then based upon that, you're going to kind of take that big world and you're going to either break it down, or you're going to say, hey, I'm going to kind of shop in that big world. And so then you're going to put together a request for proposal, and you'll get formal proposals now, which include a lot of the contractual elements of what's going to be associated that relationship. And then based on that proposal and based upon how you've weighted what's important to your organization, so is value more important than sustainability, is value equal to sustainability as an example, you'll make a decision around who you actually contract with. Might contract with a certain number, or might want, and then you put a contract in place, and then you go and you move into category management, which means you're going to now manage the relationship. I used to always say to my team, the work doesn't begin until after the contract is signed. I used to have procurement people come back to me and say, I got a great deal for the next 3 years. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm saying, we haven't done anything yet. We just signed the contract. Now we've got to make sure it's successful over the next year. So that end-to-end category management is that whole cycle. And that requires a lot of expertise. One, understanding from your budget owners that you're trying to enable, really getting clarity on what they need, having a good knowledge and expertise around the market, being able to evaluate the dynamics of the market and the positioning of all the various players, being able to then align your strategic objectives with who's the best fit for your strategic objectives, and then all of the legal aspects of pulling that together, and then launching it, and then making sure everyone is fulfilling their obligation, and really putting something in place that is driven by mutual benefit. And I think that's the most important aspect of all of this, that there's a win on both sides. And this isn't naive. I've done this for decades, right? No, I'm serious. I'm serious, Paul. There are some people in my profession who think that success is going out there and really hurting your supplier and getting the most value from them. And that's a short-term mindset. And I saw that die with people like, Lopez and the others in the car world back in the 90s. I think the real winners today who find the balance between innovation, between sustainability, and being a good global citizen, because it's important to your customers, it's important to your employees, and what's good to your customers and what's good for your employees is going to be good for your shareholder, and getting value. And value can manifest itself in innovation, obviously in the financial value that's out there, and in managing risk. Right? You mentioned the 800%. Who can absorb 800%? And ultimately, where is that going to go? It's going to go to the consumer. That's why, this whole concept on inflation and inflation stickiness in this decade is a reality for all of us. We really need to think about the macro issues that organizations like yours are there to help people manage.
Len, thank you for describing end-to-end category management. I think it definitely correlates to the work that we do here at Transparent Energy. It's almost exactly the same in that there's a life cycle, right? So we meet with our customers. We talked about helping them centralize all the data onto one particular a cloud-based platform. So that's the very beginning stages. And then we get an understanding of what their risk tolerances are like, what they're looking to achieve from a budgetary standpoint, what they're looking to achieve from a sustainability standpoint, as we mentioned earlier. And that's really the very beginning round, okay? And you talked about an RFP. So we are putting together those comprehensive RFPs. We're putting together master agreements nationally for these customers. And then we're using a proven tool in this technology. And I want to speak a little bit about why that's unique and why that's not necessarily autonomous procurement. So when you think about autonomous procurement, you think a lot more about AI and machines, determining the decisions that we're making. And so we don't want to be ignorant to that or naive to that, because we want to be able to provide that data, and we want to be able to utilize the technology to get as much information in front of our clients as we possibly can. But we also need to have internal experts that understand niche markets. So they don't just understand what's going on at a site level or at the state or at the ISO or nationally. They actually can put all those different pieces together. And so a lot of people talk about building a technology platform as a tool without a mechanic. And I couldn't agree more with those folks, because if you don't have category experts, then you're really in trouble. But a mechanic without having a wrench, they're actually at quite a disadvantage. And so here at TE, we put all the different pieces together, right? So we do have the technology that allows us to provide a lot of data and information to our customer base. We also know how to internally take in that data and explain it to them based upon what they're trying to achieve. So, from a risk mitigation standpoint, there's a strategy that we want to take a look at. If we're looking just strictly to reduce budgets, which obviously a lot of customers are, we understand what we could do there. And if we could want to couple that with, again, their sustainability needs, the tool is really helpful for that as well. So I kind of wanted to lay that out there, because I feel like a lot of companies are being pressured into utilizing certain software systems and then hoping it works out. And the reality of it is that this is a proven technology. It's 15 plus years. It's got hundreds of different suppliers around the country to understand it. We've got the internal experts, and we are able to then very quickly identify opportunities where we can help customers based on current market conditions. And I think the differentiation between that and a typical RFP is that the sales cycle for sourcing your energy is much shorter, right? So in the very beginning stages of my career, a lot of this was done on paper-based RFPs and off of Excel spreadsheets. And so you get hundreds of different emails from suppliers with bids. Those bids would come at different times of the day. The energy market is moving, so they really weren't comparable. And it took us a lot longer to get a lot less accomplished. And so the idea of bringing in this technology was to help automate certain parts of the process, while still making sure that we had control over ultimately our goals, right? So just going back to the topic of autonomous procurement, we're not just trying to sell a customer a tool. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to bring them a concept that has already been proven within the market. Again, 11,000 plus events to date, with a 99% transaction rate, bringing a tremendous amount of load to the table each and every day for all these different supplier pools. But we're also bringing the subject matter expertise to the table. So we work directly with those sourcing partners to not only utilize the tool, but also utilize our knowledge to make sure that they're getting the data they need. We're answering their questions. They're still empowered, but at the end of the day, they know they're making the best decision based on market conditions at that point in time. What I'm saying here, Len, does that kind of make sense to you?
It does. One of the volunteer responsibilities I have at this stage of my career is I'm a partner advisor to the World 50 group for chief procurement officers and chief procurement officers. They're just being inundated with a lot of technology solutions right now. So the market is pretty saturated, and they know they need these tools, right? Because every year they're being asked to do more with less, and the tools are going to help them better manage the category base. The dilemma is, I have to go out and buy technology. I have to get my organization to adopt that technology. I have to know that the technology works. I have to get my supplier base integrated into that tech. So it's a long cycle from purchase to value, right? And, because there's a lot of choices right now, it's difficult for them to make that right decision because it's a bit of a journey. And more importantly, I think, than anything else, when I've been in those positions, I've always had to follow like this 20/80 rule. I had to put, 80% of my resources against 20% of my spend because I didn't have enough people to manage all those categories. And so with, a tool like yours, with the expertise, with the short cycle from engagement to value capture, it's almost, there's no such thing as a silver bullet, but it's almost as if, what we have here in the energy space is the ability to jump the curve. And, I think the timing of this conversation is critically important as well. Why do I feel that way? In all the companies I worked for, the fiscal year always aligned with the calendar year. And October and November were incredibly busy months for me, right? Because I was always handed what was called a management decision. You have to achieve all this value of savings, and you have to do it with this fewer people. And how do I build a plan around being able to do that? And I think understanding the transparent energy model and how it works is critically important, right? Because I think what's important for people who are listening in that don't know you as well as I do is understanding a couple of things: the type of clients you've worked with and the type of value you've been able to deliver to them, your relationship with the supplier base, because I think there's a lot of trust and competency over the 15 years that you've been doing this. And then more importantly, their ability to add value and add value fast, whether that value is risk management, whether that value is sustainability, whether that value is associated with efficiencies and cost. And quite honestly, in my experience and what I've learned working with you, you can deliver all three. It's just a weighted, it's a weighted average. You come to me and you say, Len, you're a chief procurement officer of company XYZ. What are you looking for? I might say, you know what, Paul, I need 50% cost savings. I need 25%, on the sustainability piece, and I need 25% on the risk piece. In reality, what I've seen over the past 10 years is it's more like I need 50% on the risk piece. I need 25% on a sustainability piece. And I absolutely need 25% on the cost piece because, I've got to bring value because my customers are getting bombarded with inflation. My suppliers are trying to manage those costs, and I'm working with them in managing costs. So, that I think is the story. And I think your ability, I'd say, to talk about some of these clients, the complexity of those clients, and your ability and the cycle time of your ability to deliver value, I think is really what's most important in our conversation today, because it's won me over. And look, I'm a hard sell on all this, Paul. I've been doing this a long time, and people have been trying to sell me the silver bullet for 40 years. But when it comes to energy, when it comes to, I know my peer group's commitment to a better world, a safer world, and my peer group's commitment to bringing and delivering value to their internal clients through their supplier base, I think transparent energy has a great story to tell. And kudos to you and your team.
Thanks, Len. Yeah, our customer base is really diverse. We serve every vertical you can imagine, so long as they have a pretty significant electricity and natural gas spend. And again, if they need some sustainability options, we're more than happy to help them. We're really proud of the work we've done with the Urban Land Institute, writing a white paper that we'll make available to everybody. It's about 55 pages. It's peer reviewed, and it's the best way to buy offsite renewables, right? And so we're constantly putting a lot of information out there for those very large users. But you talked about our client base, and so it's diverse and it's unique, but they all have the same problems. They may have different goals. They may look at risk differently. All of that, to us, we're agnostic to that. Our real key is serving the clients need to be on the same side of the table as them. But I'll bring up a Fortune 10 customer that's in the healthcare space. When they were operating in silos, hundreds of facilities throughout North America, no centralization of any kind of information, really trying to understand how to hit their sustainability goals, but how to do so within certain, budgetary realms. And what was impressive, I think, for our team was that we were able to, within 2 weeks, we were able to obtain every single bit of information at every site level when it came to, their electricity and natural gas spend on both the supply and delivery side. So that was all put up into the cloud, into one platform. We then started to create unique RFPs that were going to be set up for what we call a pre-auction call, which is kind of an event where we are going to give a lot of information to our client base and let them determine, with our help, of course, what kind of products they want to look at and what we're going to actually run for that live auction event. For this particular customer, we were able to, deliver about 150 sourced contracts within a 3-week time period, right? And so that's not something that could really be delivered for most customers if they're utilizing a consultant that doesn't have this technology that I was talking about today. So very quickly, we were able to get them into a series of contracts that were coterminous. So they had kind of the same end date, right? And then what we did is we managed the life of that contract and we set triggers. And we looked for times in the market where we were able to hit certain budgetary goals they were looking to accomplish. And very quickly, what we found was that we were able to actually source 48 of those contracts in a 1-week time period. It was just a state of the market that made sense for them. We had already identified kind of where we wanted to be. And we were able to kind of deliver that result to them very quickly. What I think was even better was because there was so much budgetary savings, they actually were decided to make the informed decision to purchase that energy directly from green energy sources, both wind turbines and solar fields, right? And so that was interesting because we reduced human capital on their side. We centralized all of the information. We made sure they knew where all their contracts were. We identified that they were being billed correctly. We identified what the true budget was. We forecasted what their future budgets looked like. We set those triggers, and then bam, utilizing the tool, we were able to get thousands of unique bids across a series of different agreements in different parts of the country, right? Really, I think it was in 32 different states. So that's a good story to tell. That's more on the private Fortune 10 side. We serve a lot of big public sector customers. We're really happy with a group called Sustainable Westchester that's doing great things for the county of Westchester, where we help them serve, over 100,000 homes and 6,400 small businesses. The idea there was to bring this tool that was typically utilized by some of the largest companies in the world, whether they be private equity firms, Fortune 500 firms, whatever you want to name it, and bring it to then the public sector. And by putting all of their load together, they had a really good story to tell. It was over 2 million megawatt hours of load, incredible amount of volume here. And we actually got 800 unique bids in that process, right? And so now you're aggregating all of that load, you're centralizing all of it. And then the benefits of that, again, another opportunity where the customers were able to buy state-specific RECs in that opportunity. I love that story because it's one of those rare win-win-win stories. The residents won, the small commercial owners won, the actual suppliers were able to serve the needs, and it was beneficial for them. And then by getting those state-specific RECs, we make a lot more of those renewable energy projects at the state level available, right? And they don't really exist without having those buyers. And so to us, we love that story because we feel like it kind of puts together all the different pieces of what we've been working on here for the last 15 plus years.
Yeah, it's a great story. Through this whole experience of automation and digitization and centralization is really this whole concept around partnering, right? Picking the right partner, someone you can look in the eye and trust. They've done it before. They take the time to understand your culture, understanding some of your key decision makers, not working to upset the apple cart, but actually working to complement what you're already doing well and just making you do it better, And I think that's really, really important, and that whole partnering decision is something that, is important to me, and, and getting to know you and some of the key leaders on your team. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and expertise, but a lot of trust that's been built along with all of that. And again, for me, the important piece is companies have to invest in technology, they have to invest in relationships, and they have to invest in the automation that allows them to be able to do that. And the ability to basically, say, and going back to if we met 3 years ago, for me to say to you, so what you're saying, Paul, is I don't have to put any people resources on this. Maybe I have a couple of people at the highest level managing it as a project and managing it as a product, as a partner relationship. But you're not going to disappear on me once the contract is signed. You're telling me, look, we're going to put all these contracts, but now we're going to become your category manager. We're going to keep you up to date on what's happening in the market. We're going to keep your teams up to date in what's happening and in terms of any changes that need to be made or how to respond to some possible. Are you telling me that you're going to kind of be an extension of my organization through this relationship?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Len. Our job is to complement what's already being done within the organization, right? We're not trying to upset the apple cart. We talked before about empowerment. A lot of the customers we work with, they're doing a fantastic job. Where they're limited is they just don't have the supplier pool or the technology to be able to actually get all of that information so quickly. And a lot of the times I hear from them when maybe they're reluctant at first, because I'll give you an example of like a big private equity firm, right? We serve many different private equity firms throughout the country. And I think the reason why is they were the first to really catch on to what it is that we were doing, right? So they too want to empower their different companies that all have their separate P&L. So they'll acquire a portfolio company. They'll probably put some C-level executives in place, CEO, CFO, but they're still keeping most of, if not all of the staff that was at that company for 10, 15, 20 years, right? The last thing they want to do is come in and aggravate the very people that have made the organization already so successful. Right. What they want to come in and do is say, listen, we trust that you guys really understand what's going on at the site level. We know you have a way of doing things, and we know that you understand what goes on there better than anyone else. But we've vetted every company out there, and what we like to do is we like to bring in Transparent Energy. We like their people, their process technology. We want you to work with them. So when you guys are deciding to source your energy, we want you to do it through their platform. We want you to follow their process. And the reason for that is we're good at raising capital. We're good at buying facilities. We then need to find ways to lower OpEx without having to hire more people. So that's why it's kind of some that's being outsourced to us. We also need to be able to have an audit trail so that we have a process that's followed for every one of our portfolio companies. And again, these are different P&Ls, and the risk tolerances within each company may be very different. You have one company that one of their portfolio companies owns a lot of data centers. Other own wastewater treatment facilities. Other own, you talked about forging before. We're the vendor of choice for the Forging Institute of America, right? So these different groups, they bring us in because they understand our process. They like our tool. They like our expertise, but they also know that we can collaborate with the current staff members to make sure they feel really confident in the decisions that they're making. And at the end of the day, again, I keep saying that audit trail, but it's very important for these companies to be able to understand what's going on for all their different portfolio companies to make sure they're kind of following the guidelines they want to follow in order to have success. Does that speak to kind of some of the?
Yeah, it does, right? Because look, if you put somebody like, in my former position in place, where I want to put my internal resources are in the business that we're in. What do I mean by that? I mean, in my previous life, I wanted people in my organization to really understand categories like clinical research organizations, because in the pharmaceutical industry, that's our business, right? Getting a product and a molecule to market and being able to cure disease and give people better quality of life. Or in our medical device business, how do we execute those critical products like suture? Right? I wanted them to understand the science and those particular categories. Or even in our former consumer products companies, skincare and hair care and whatever else. Not to say that I don't value energy, but I'd rather have a third-party partner who understands energy exceptionally well, managing that for me and having the comfort to know that that's being managed in a way that allows us to achieve our strategic objectives. And the key piece that we've talked about here, the ability to do that end-to-end, the ability to manage it after the contract is signed, to be in front of issues, not reacting to issues. And I think, for me, there are many people in my former position who are dealing with a lot of these management decisions. Do more with less. I have a lot of categories where I have to deploy my internal resources that are very specific to my customer and my client, but are there categories that I'm putting like at the tail spend piece? I don't know what's going on down there, but if anything blows up there, or if I can get value out of that, do I have a relationship that's going to allow me to manage that? And that's why I think the timing of what we're talking about today is critically important. I get on an exercise bike every morning and I watch CNBC. And then I see companies like Microsoft going out and make big strategic energy decisions. Well, when I talk to my CFO or my CEO, and they go to a board meeting and they ask me the question as a CPO or a chief supply officer, what are we doing in the energy space? Do I say, oh yeah, we got that covered because I've got 50 people around the country managing for me? Or should I be thinking about having a relationship like you have with some of these big players? You talked about private equity. how many of them have activists knocking on the door and asking them questions like this, right? So I think this is so timely because many of them, I think, are being put in a position of how do I get out in front of these energy macro issues in a way that I am doing the best job I can for my organization.
Yeah, you nailed a lot of different key points there. What it reminded me of a little bit, Len, is we obviously work with a lot of the largest REITs in the country, and historically, forget about separate silos or site managers. They outsourced a lot of this to property managers or asset managers. What happened was, though, there was a corporate decision made, whether it was by their board of advisors, whether it was by some of the C-level executives, that we need to take all of this in-house. The reason we need to take all this in-house is, one, is energy costs are, one of the highest items on our P&L sheet. And when we've seen some stuff that's been going on within PJM, and I'm sure will happen in other ISOs, where capacity costs are going up by 800%. And then Morgan Stanley saying the next capacity auctions going to go up another 137% from there. So like 1,200% increases on certain ancillary items. So one, just the cost is greater. You talked about inflation, that's affecting it as well. Supply chain issues, that's affecting it as well. More supply, more demand and less supply and an aging grid. These are all the problems that they're dealing with. And so now we got to bring it in-house because, one, it's more expensive to us than it's ever been before, and we need to be competitive. Two, we do have certain sustainability commitments that we've already made, and we have to figure out how we can, work within our budget. So that's a lot of times we're tasked with working with the board who made a commitment, right, the CFO that's really concerned about the cost, and then, the chief sustainability officer that really wants all the bells and whistles. And how do you kind of make sure that all three of those parties are satisfied and happy? And that's a real challenge. But so now these REITs, they brought all this in house. So some of the groups we work with, they own 500-600 facilities across the country, and no one individual or one group has expertise in all those different markets. I can say here at TE, we have a large, robust team that does have expertise in all those different markets, right? But we've really been tasked by the REITs to say, listen, we're bringing this all in house. We've made these commitments. We need to figure out a way to partner with someone that can help us do it faster, more efficiently, centralized, within our budgets. Oh, and by the way, we need help with us with your sustainability needs. So the point of you saying it, I think is really timely now. I think it is, because in certain arenas, groups that formerly didn't even have to have an energy buying group now are purchasing the energy on their own, and they need a partner. In other groups, they've had an energy team forever, but really nothing's changed in the last 15 years. They're still doing things the way that they were doing them, when the energy markets first deregulated. And so they find us as a partner because to them, it's a little bit of everything. It's, okay, we've got the subject matter experts. We have, whether that be for traditional buying or for sustainability needs, we have the tool so we can get a lot of data very quickly. It all lies within one particular cloud, so we can access that data immediately. There's an audit trail that's surrounded by it, and at the same time, we don't have to hire more individuals to be able to take this on. We can keep the team we have today, partner with Transparent Energy. They make them more efficient and more effective, and then we know at even the C-level what's going on, and we can then focus on other efforts within our organization that matter at that point in time.
Yeah, and look, what I like is speed and scale. What you're telling me is you can work at speed and you can work at scale. And there's adjacencies too. I'm going to give you one of my pet issues. I gave up cutting the lawn years ago because I just couldn't keep up with that process. So I have a landscaper, and every time the price of gas goes up, he puts like a surcharge on my bill, and he never takes it away, right? And so it's like a lot of companies lease space, and all of a sudden you're getting this. Well, I got to add because my energy costs are going up. Well, I don't know. I'm kind of ignorant at it. But now, working with a company like Transparent Energy, I can go back and go, whoa, time out. Where are you sourcing your energy? Where are the costs going up? If I can bring you value here, can my lease costs go down, right? And so it gives you not only the ability to work within your own four walls, but also your supplier four walls in many, many ways, right? This whole issue of just being better educated and knowledgeable. Like I said, my landscaper is still charging me gas fees when gas was $5 a gallon. And it's down under $3, at least here in New Jersey. Those types of issues become really, really important because organizations in managing through these macro issues around inflation, they've got to find value everywhere. And that value needs to be reinvested in growth. So if you say to me, Len, okay, so if we came in your former life and we helped you save money and energy, where's that money going to go? You know where it's going to go? It's going to go into research, right? To find more drugs to save lives, right? Or go into research in other companies that are involved in technology or anything else. Right? So I think, companies really need to look at this space in a more strategic way than they ever have before. And I think that's why the timeliness is so very important. That's why I'm so happy in working with your team and being able to spread the news around the ability to work with an organization that has a 15-year track record, the ability to operate with speed and scale, and the ability to operate in many various verticals because they've had the experience. Not something that happens every day, Paul. I wish I would have known you 5 years ago. I would have gotten a better bonus 5 years ago.
Well, I'm happy we know each other now.
That's right.
You had mentioned, some of your pet peeves, and it reminds me of an interesting case study we just did. We work with a buying cooperative for a group in the QSR space, and they helped us. We looked at 150 locations for a particular customer, and we put together some incredible results. For them, there was huge budget reduction. That's not always the case, but it was both budget reduction and risk mitigation. And they then publicized that, not us. They kind of reached out and said, hey, this is a white paper on what we did and how we did it with TE. And we really enjoyed this process. It was unbelievable because it's not common for us, but we actually had a lot of inbound calls and messaging to us going, listen, we heard about what you were able to do for a similar type of organization, because these facilities operate, usually the same time of day, and they have the same type of equipment. And they said, listen, we looked at our budgets and they're nowhere near what you were able to accomplish for this group. What was the secret sauce? I said, well, it's not so much secret sauce. It's really about being really stringent upon a process. And again, utilizing that tool. And so we were able to get another 300 locations for different owners in that same space and help provide the same results to them, right? They had to be informed about it, right? And so we do a good job informing individuals, but it's even better when it comes from some of their sister companies, right? That happens a lot in the private equity space, where we'll work with 4 or 5 of the different groups that they have within their pool, and they'll start talking amongst themselves about, hey, what are you guys doing for X, Y, and Z? And when it comes to energy, we've been really happy to hear that they feel like what we're providing them, it's really necessary for their needs now and moving forward. Maybe it wasn't something they were top of mind 10 years ago, but it certainly is today. So we're trying to make some of those pet peeves be less cumbersome for individuals, so they're not just seeing costs go up and up and up and up. And the reality of it is even with the state of inflation, even when I talk about within the capacity markets, right now, today, as we sit here, the actual commodities for electricity and natural gas, they're sitting around 20-year lows. The problem is that what we're forecasting in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that is where we're really concerned. And so we're putting some action in place now to put up the rails for our customers. That's very important when you talk about Fortune 500, because these are publicly traded companies. They need to have a sense as to what their budget can be. They can't be totally out of whack, like we mentioned before with some folks that are 800% out. They need to understand what those costs are going to be, and we help put up those rails for our customers.
Yeah, it's perfect, right? Because we talked about earlier in our conversation around this whole concept of end-to-end category management, looking at your needs a year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, but you're also looking at and getting an insight around the market 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years out. And there's a broader good to all of this in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong. What's the broader good? Well, the broader good is you're kind of, in a way, level loading these needs so that we can better manage this growth over the next 5 years, right? By using that broader base, by being able to better align capacity to utilization, by being able to understand, you mentioned it earlier, we're getting these significant climate events, right? The ability to respond to those climate events in a way from a continuity of supply and a continuity of activity. So, there's a broader good that's being done here around managing through a lot of growth that this country is going to go through with, remanufacturing back in the States. Companies are making commitments to build facilities here. Companies are building, data centers. They're building chip manufacturing centers, as you mentioned before. They're building manufacturing sites. So we're adding all this load. But if we do this in a more collaborative, integrated way around level loading it, I think it becomes smarter for the supplier as well, because they're all about capital investments. All their costs are capital investments. So if they can work with companies like yours as an intermediary to better understand where they should invest and how they should invest, and knowing that that's going to be loaded properly, it's going to make a lot of sense for everyone. You talked about the back. I want to share one more story, if you don't mind. Right?
Sure.
I want to share a story about when we were doing the vaccine. Well, when we were doing the vaccine, many of us in the space, in the life sciences space, were drawing from the same suppliers, the same supplies, right? And what we couldn't do is we couldn't work in a vacuum, right? We had to be able to collaborate so that we weren't stealing supplies for life-saving drugs in an area that might not be as critical. And in that interim period, we worked as a little bit of a consortium. Now we work with a third party that managed all of the confidentiality of all of that. But working together as a group for the greater good allowed us to be most effective when the world needed us to be most effective. So we're not dealing with that type of extreme, but in reality, if you're talking about 3 to 5 years out, if you're talking about significant climate events, if you're talking about companies investing, you look at, we had these hurricanes, and companies were impacted relative to IV liquids that were knocked out, right? Things like that. If you're looking at energy as a critical source of being able to supply these sites, and what we're doing here, the more people that participate in a process like this, the more greater good there is in this country being able to manage through the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. I think there is a consortium in terms of the way our organization operates. So, we have NDAs in place with all of our customers. We're not sharing their data, but we are gaining more and more information about the state of the market. And that is something that we can share with our large customer pool. And we can let them know what some others are doing within, the same verticals and where we're able to benefit them in one scenario or another. We're constantly learning as our customer base grows. And today we're serving about 212,000 meters across the country. So that's a lot of data. That's a lot of information. We understand what the struggles are in certain markets compared to others. We understand what actions we've helped customers take based upon their specific needs. And then we can utilize that information to help kind of bring that into the fold when we're working with new customers that are dealing with the same types of problems, because we've been through it before. We understand it. We have a solution, and sharing that solution is a big part of bring joy to my life, because for me, from a sustainability perspective, it was always something that you was seen as an additional cost, an additional line item for customers. And that's not always the case today with community solar opportunities. I know Johnson & Johnson years ago did a lot of on-site solar when that made sense from certain, tax standpoint with the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we're seeing opportunities now where we can help customers with additionality or with sustainability goals, and it doesn't come at any additional cost. And how do we know that? We know that by actually running these events to see what those costs look like, and then sharing them with our customer base, right? And we can run both traditional auctions and green auctions same day and show the customer what the real difference in price is to be able to make that commitment, right? It helps them from a sustainability perspective. It helps us, from a client perspective, but also gets more and more of these projects done, which I think are going to be, a way to actually help strengthen the grid while we work on better battery backup storage. I still think natural gas is going to be kind of that bridge fuel, but and now you're seeing, Google made a big investment in nuclear. I could talk about this for a while. It seems like we're doing a lot of different things together, and we're learning from one another in terms of how to get in front of this problem that we can see. We got 2020 vision to see there's going to be a problem in 3 to 5 years. What are we doing about it? And then sharing that information to me, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. I think there's a significant responsibilities that all C-level leaders in any company, public or private, need to do in this area. And transparency is really important. If you look at what's happening in Europe now, where there's a regulatory requirement of being able to audit your sustainability commitments and what you're publishing, I mean, you have to be able to have this type of technology and relationship in place to be able to show that entire life cycle and pass the audit test. I think we're not far from that, and I think the reason Europe is doing it and putting it in, we're going to be following, I'm sure, here, is for those bigger, broader issues, right? Be able to understand and optimize capital, to be able to better understand how to better manage the transition to resourcing here in the United States, to be able to support those technologies that are going to be there in the future, whether that technology is moving more towards, electric vehicles, better data crunching, the ability for organizations to have greater influence on achieving climate goals and so on. Everything's been accelerated. Everything they thought was going to happen in 2045 is happening in 2025, unfortunately. I mean, I have a snowblower I used twice in New Jersey over the past 2 years, right? I don't even know if I need it anymore. Well, this has changed. I was in college in the late 70s in New Jersey, and we were having 5 feet of snow every other day, right? So, I mean, let's face it. I mean, we have a responsibility to our shareholders. We have a responsibility to our communities. And I think it's important that organizations that really care and that are critically accountable for their ability to serve their clients and their employees and their shareholders, that they really look at this space in a more strategic way and investigate what opportunities there are out there.
Yeah,
it would be a disappointment if they don't.
We're in October and we're seeing 80-degree weather, right? So you're absolutely right about that, Len. And I think just one thing I didn't mention earlier is one thing that we're doing for a lot of our customers, because it goes beyond just the sourcing of electricity, natural gas, and renewables, is we're helping them with their energy efficiency needs. And we're doing that through some on-bill financing options that we actually still can run auctions for. So we'll get some of the bigger players in the world, the BPs, the Shells, the NRGs, the NextEras. And, they've got a lot of capital and they want to help deploy it into ESG-related investments. And so what you actually could do is you could source some of your energy needs on a longer-term contract. That doesn't mean you have to hedge these different components, but you could actually do an energy efficiency project and you're billed directly by the utility on a month-to-month basis, right? But the entire project is funded ahead of time. So you're getting maybe a new chiller, a new boiler, HVAC upgrades. People are still doing LED lighting. But something you mentioned earlier is just this whole kind of move towards the EV vehicles, right? Again, it's difficult to ask some of these customers to take on these additional costs with everything they're already dealing with. We've come out of a global pandemic, crazy inflation. It's a really difficult market for these folks. And now you're saying, hey, we also need to make sustainability, upgrades to your facility and commitments. And that cost is going to be burdened, to you. The reality is with the way that we're doing with on-bill financing is because the work's all done up front, the consumption at the site level is going down immediately, yet you're paying it out over a 5 or 10-year term, right? So that's just another service that we offer to our customer base, because we're really, listen, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that's never used, right? We're trying to help lower that consumption as much as we can, help them become more efficient. And by the way, you could do all of that and add those EV chargers again, because you've opened up room within your budget. And now, the people that are visiting you or your employees are really happy about it. It's great for the environment. And at the same time, it doesn't really affect your P&L. And that's so important to our client base.
It is, right? Because they want to invest in their growth. And this is an opportunity for them to, let's say, allow that to amortize over a period of time. It opens the window for mid-cap companies and companies that are really challenged from a capital standpoint or are more focused on investing their capital towards growth. And, that's why it's been an exciting opportunity for me to work with your team. That's why it's been, for me, the opportunity in not only working with your team, but wanting to share your story. Because I think it's a great story. It's not too good to be true. Trust me, it's true. It's more about people who are willing to just take the time to invest the time in getting to know your organization and the people in your organization. In many ways, they'll be able to do that, whether it's just working with your team or just doing their own investigation on what transparent energy is all about.
Well, Len, thank you for the kind words. Like I said, I mentioned in the beginning as a mentor and definitely as a friend. For those that are viewing this today that want to learn a little bit more, because Len and I have been speaking a lot about telling our story and how it matters to the general public, there is a white paper that we co-authored that's going to be coming out. So if you enjoyed this Fireside Chat today and you want to learn more about what we're talking about here, and actually we go into even more detail, we're going to be publishing that shortly. You'll see that on our website and on our LinkedIn. So we hope you guys enjoy that, and more than happy to answer any and all of your questions. Len, I just wanted to thank you today for your time. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Same here, Paul, and hopefully we'll be able to at least get some folks really interested and educated around the opportunities to get out in front of some of these energy challenges in a way that's purposeful. I think for me, and I know you feel the same way. We love what we've done through our whole careers, but when we can add purpose to what we do, then we know we're making a difference. And I truly believe what you and the team are doing at Transparent Energy is really making a difference. And I applaud what you're doing and happy to be affiliated with all that work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Len, for the kind words. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. Now, take care. Take care, all.
Bye.